Good afternoon, everyone. I am Leon Caldwell, and welcome to the Expertise in Building Holistic Communities, a session in which we will be hearing from three leading developers about their experience in integrating the tenets of holistic real estate development into their projects. I will be moderating this panel. I am joined by Lorraine Wilson-Drake of Wilson-Drake Development, Tayyib Smith of Smith and Roller, and Anthony Fullard, who will be joining us shortly, of West Powelton Development. So I want to ask each of our panelists to just give a brief introduction about you and your work in Philadelphia and your relationship to Philadelphia. Why don't we start with Lorraine?
Awesome. Hi, everybody. I'm Lorraine Wilson-Drake. I own a company called Wilson-Drake Development. We're located in South Philadelphia, and we have been developing in Philadelphia for 20 years. The way I got started was I grew up in San Francisco, lived in New York for about 16 years before moving to Philadelphia. And when I moved here, I had a really hard time finding an apartment. And I like to live in Black and brown communities, probably because most of the time my work took me to communities where, I was frequently only the only Black person. So it just struck me when I got here how disinvested our communities had become, and just how barren they had become, and how things had just been sort of left. I mean, I know we had white flight in the 70s, but come on, guys, it's like 20 years later. So anyway, I decided to start a company where I do what we call affordable luxury. So my value proposition is I build in neighborhoods, Black and brown neighborhoods that haven't had a lot of investment. And my value proposition is I'll give you a really nice apartment, but it's going to be in a neighborhood that probably has some challenges, hoping to spark change in those neighborhoods. And that's what we've been able to do. When we people usually follow us, neighborhoods usually become safer when they have a lot less vacancy, and just look a lot brighter when people start to invest in them. So that's kind of our story. We've been doing it for 20 years. The only other thing that I'd add is we're very small. We do everything kind of with a little bit of capital that we have in a bank loan. So unlike some of the other companies, we haven't grown very much because we do one project at a time. And we don't have any other outside investors. We don't use government subsidies. We just kind of make magic on our own. And really enjoyed being here in Philadelphia and being able to bring change to some neighborhoods, and just looking forward to kind of continuing the conversation.
Thank you so much. Tayyib, I saw Anthony Fullard duck in for a second and disappeared. So let's just go to Tayyib Smith.
Thank you for that, Lorraine, and thank you, Leon, for moderating this panel. So I'm a serial entrepreneur, and my how I came to real estate is similar to Lorraine's, but I would say from a local indigenous perspective. I'm a third generation Philadelphia. My great grandfather moved to Philly in 1923, so the first wave of the Great Migration, and I and my family members have dealt with housing instability intergenerationally. So probably about 15 years ago, I was living in Northern Liberties, which was just called North Philly when I was a kid. And I saw so much development happening rather rapidly that I couldn't remember what was on a corner one day. And, the building had been there, my entire life. And after a year or so, I've realized that my understanding of my environment was changing. And I started asking people, questions about gentrification. And I went to some colleagues of mine who worked in real estate, and I asked naively, how do you do development without displacing people? And honestly, most people shrugged and told me things like, that's the game, or have you ever played Monopoly? And they were very insensitive things that got me to keep asking questions. And some of my first joint venture partners were people who answered me inquisitively and stayed in dialogue with me. So being a serial entrepreneur, I've owned a creative agency in the city for 15 years. And again, naively, I found out that a lot of things that real estate developers outsource for were in my repertoire of experiences. And my friend David Grasso, I pitched him on developing a co-working space about 10 years ago. And he taught me how to do a sweat equity deal. So again, naively, my first real estate deal was a $2 million project, 20,000 square feet on the 15th, 16th floor of a Center City building, which, put me in commercial real estate, where most of us come into real estate through like a hand to mouth, what they call flipping. So having that knowledge and having friends and mentors who were very frank with me and told me, you're just, if not more intelligent than the people I have to negotiate with, you're just not used to being in the capital stack. And here's how you do it, right? So through a bunch of different experiences and being inquisitive, I studied real estate from the lived perspective of people who are consistently and intergenerationally displaced from communities. So today I'm partners in a real estate development company with my partner, Jacob Roller, called Smith & Roller. And we have a series of acquisitions and some projects at different stages of development. I have a joint venture with Shift Capital in the Harrogate, Kensington section of Philly, which is about 116 apartments with 30,000 square feet of mixed-use commercial. We've just done a series of acquisitions at 52nd and Market, where we have about 50,000 square feet of CMX4, where we plan to do some apartments in a few years. And I have some other things under contract throughout the city. But to speak to holistic development, one other thing I want to mention, when Jacob and I started first seriously talking about doing a joint venture, he contacted me because he read about a guy named Theester Gates in Chicago. And Theester is an artist who became a real estate developer. Oddly enough, Knight Foundation had asked me to apply to Theester's salon. And I spent about 9 months in a cohort with people visiting Chicago once a month, about 70 people from 14 different cities exploring what we call equitable development. And honestly, after that experience, I came away with more questions than answers, even looking at development from a national perspective. And it kind of got myself and a series of partners to take equitable and holistic development and how to have a positive impact on community seriously. And I have been saying for years to colleagues who don't share our perspective on, Black and brown equity, that the first people to find a holistic, still profitable way to develop housing, everyone around the country will be trying to get in touch with them to figure it out, because we have an international housing crisis. So that was prior to coming together with 7 developers in the collective and partnering with Sandra and Steven to create some of the things we're doing today. And I feel, proud to be in, let's say, an alliance with all of you. And with that, I'll pass to my brother, Anthony Fullard.
Hey, Anthony, welcome. We are essentially doing a brief introduction to our work.
Okay. Yes. Well, I was told to take off my hat, but now my hair isn't combed, so I can't do that. But anyway, yes, Anthony Fullard from West Powelton Development. Really, trying to just make it short and sweet, because I know that we don't have a lot of time. But been in the construction industry for over, I used to say 25 years, but now I think it has went up to about almost close to 35 years, if not more, in the construction industry, where I started in that industry as a union iron worker, and then was able to parlay my expertise and knowledge about building buildings and bridges up and down the East Coast into my own steel company, where I erected a number of buildings in North Jersey, Philadelphia, and some of the other surrounding counties there, and then went on into other business ventures, and played a vital role in the early 2000s in the African American Chamber of Commerce, but always had my hands into construction in some form or fashion. And then probably about 11 or 12 years ago, ventured into some development opportunities, and which had piqued my interest was in the West Philadelphia area around Powelton Avenue, because of the Drexel's home ownership program, which I think that was a tremendous program and opportunity for African-American developers, because it was, on the peripheral end of Drexel's perimeter there, in a lot of Black neighborhoods that should be a part of the renaissance that was coming, that is coming, and that is still coming, as you can see now. But the home ownership program was great because it was for staff members and entry-level people that would be looking for affordable housing, and also some market rate housing as well. But it was a very good program that we got into, but then COVID hit and really put a halt to a lot of that. But that was my entry into development, specifically with new construction, not a lot of rehab, even though that I was fortunate by the Honorable Janie Blackwell, who tapped into me and then asked me to throw our hat in the ring as a developer to do the Osage and Pine iconic project, to begin to remove that black eye that stayed on the city of Philadelphia for 30 plus years. And we was honored. We was more honored that we could help that community, a all Black community, and it was an influential community before the bombing there. And we were so honored that, that we could be a part of that and the healing of that community, to bring that neighborhood back. And that has been done, and it's been very successful. And we were able to not only help those homeowners that bought those houses, but also able to bring those flat line value of those homes that was affected by that bombing for so many years, but to bring their values back up. So I'm going to stop there, but those are some of the things of how we got started and things that we are proud of as a developer.
Thank you so much. As you can see from this panel, there's one of the pieces that oftentimes we end up entering in this real estate development space is out of need or necessity, right? Like trying to answer our own questions or solve our own problems or challenges that we may confront. I'm curious in how each of you may define, Tayyib, you talked about like equitable as one of the pieces and adding holistic, but how do you each define this notion of like holistic equitable development, and why is it important to the communities that you actually develop in? I'm gonna ask Lorraine to start off with that.
Well, I'll start. So having lived in, some of these neighborhoods. So I mentioned I transitioned here from New York. I was very early adapter to Harlem. Bought a brownstone in the late 90s when, there wasn't a neighbor on either side of me, and the neighborhood was considered, fairly dangerous, very much like what you see here today. So I'll say a couple of things. So one of the challenges of living in those neighborhoods is, school systems, healthcare, where can I buy a vegetable? Like all of that stuff is really real. So because we're small, and we realize that in order for businesses in those neighborhoods to locate in order for businesses to locate in those kind of neighborhoods and to be able to sustain themselves, the first thing that you need are people. Like if you're in a neighborhood where, the vacancy rate is 40%, the odds of being able to sustain a business in that neighborhood are very low. So us being small and very focused, we thought, well, the first thing you need to do is bring back residents. And if we can bring back residents,
Right.
Hopefully some of the services will follow. So we see it. And then if you can advocate for things like schools. So we feel like our part is going to places where other people are not right now and starting developments so that we can bring back residents to those neighborhoods. And then as we bring back residents, we can bring in services, and there are some
Right.
things that will work, before all of that, but that's
Yeah.
kind of how I see it. But yeah, having lived in those neighborhoods, it's a real challenge to have to go
Right.
outside of your neighborhood for pretty much everything.
So essentially, the density will bring in the commercial, and then you have opportunities to even curate what commercials in to support people in their own kind of living. Tayyib, what about you? How are you looking at this stuff?
So for me, it's a necessity, and it's actually a human rights issue, because if you don't have safe space to live, work, and play, or if you don't have a healthy community, if you look at Councilwoman Sanchez's district, probably has a 20-year life expectancy differential from Society Hill, right? That's directly related to public policies that go back to the 1930s. If we think about Black and brown people, we usually move into the remnants of communities that were built for someone else. And then we have to live and maintain housing stock that you don't have the ability to capitalize. And then if you look at, Philadelphia schools, 30% of third graders read on grade level, right? And they live in communities where the lion's share of the public policies that, to some extent, you could say manufactures poverty for people who live within certain zip codes, who are also excluded from the benefits of taxation in monetized zip codes, right? And then we have a 10x differential in white household wealth versus Black household wealth. So every $100 the median white person has in the United States, a Black family has access to $5. That's $16,000 versus $146,000. So the metrics are there. But if we talk about the number of institutions, nonprofits, public-private partnerships, and public officials who get to maintain their standard of living while servicing poverty and making a good living, we have to reimagine how we look at housing, Black and brown people, and how are we participating in the modern economy? Because we can't keep creating things that are just displacing people to the suburbs, because now poverty is rising in the suburbs, right? So we're constantly robbing Peter to pay Paul, as my grandmother would say, just to survive. And if we don't, reimagine with some courage and real courage and leadership to fix, all of the intrinsic racist ills of the past, we have to demand more. And if we're not participating as business people, we will always be on the sidelines working in the labor class to build housing that's not even for our, aunts and uncles.
Yeah, for those of you who are just joining, Tayyib often gets confused who's the professor and who's the poet. So I just wanted always drop in. It's like just this great knowledge. One of the things I want to focus on, we often, those statistics and the data is clear that Philly is a tale of two cities, right? There's a whole bunch of names that Philadelphia has, and not just Philadelphia, by the way, other cities as well. When you have such profound disparities that show up in various ways. The question I have, though, is at some point, being a solutionist as I am, Anthony, what's the role of Black developers who have a conscience around some of these really core issues or fundamental issues that will impact the growth of a region, right? I know we talk about, the region's growing and an opportunity to do growth. What's our role to be equitable in our approach to this work? What's our role to solving the problems, if you will, as laid out by Tayyib? And not just our role. I mean, we have a particular portion of it, but there's others who also, because we didn't really create some of these problems we're trying to solve, right? But what's our stake in this as well?
Well, I think, Tayyib starts off the whole conversation as Black developers. I mean, you can't even talk about Black developers in Black neighborhoods that are still run down, that are still ridden by crime, that are still not getting the proper schools as Lorraine mentioned, and also the proper commercial food supermarkets, that are attracted to their areas. But you have to start with the conversation that Tayyib started in the 1930s, late 1920s, that was instituted by the federal government. Let's get that right now, okay? All right. This was designed by a white, racist federal government that ensured, particularly, that Black people did not benefit from the economics of land and housing, period. So we have to start there and have to go into these conversations, understanding, how we got here, and then as late as 2021. So, and now to answer your question, Leon, it is just something I think is inherent in Black people, that we still fight the fight, and that we are the most committed individuals when we look at our communities. Mm-hmm. Lorraine, I mean, if you get time, go and see what her husband has done on Berkeley, on Pulaski Avenue, and put a quality multi-family building there that is affordable rents, and you would be surprised of what you are getting for what you are renting. I mean, there's no comparisons of what the value that you will get and live for that rent. But this is what Black developers do, okay? And where we will go into a community, and I was just last night speaking to Councilman Johnson about a development opportunity for another developer, not even for me, but for another developer that was trying to do something in King Session, okay? And he was being blocked, another Black developer, he was being blocked by RCOs. He was trying to do something similar to what Lorraine and her husband does, and bringing a multifamily in a community that nobody wanted it to do no development. There's no development going there, nothing new. A new construction, he's bringing money. And when the councilman found out where it was being done at, he said, I support it and I want to see this happen. Because ain't nobody else doing anything. Actually, last week, somebody had just got murdered. But we as Black developers are the first to want to bring that kind of development into our communities, to attract that kind of focus, that kind of new development, new construction, new housing, new home ownership.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And we are really ready to put our dollars into that development, go into debt, and all of the things. And we don't get the same, and I just want to say that we don't get the same financial support, even when we have site control from the banks. And this is why hard money can thrive so successful in our city, okay, because they prey on that, okay? But we don't get the same opportunity or the same desire to help to finance our projects, to bring that kind of equity to the table that, that can see the return on the investment.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And so, but again, to answer your question, Black developers are the first ready to go into these undesirable neighborhoods, undesirable communities, okay, to be the first one in to bring that kind of development. And then you'll see the white developers come, with their money, with all of their financial backing, and then they just go and just start building all over our communities as if they are the answer to our problems.
So if I were to, to think through from a solution perspective, I heard a couple things, right? So I heard one solution is for those who have a clear interest in product in that community and has a real interest in the community and it's thriving, to actually be part of this, the solution. The other thing I heard too, Anthony, you bring up, which I'm sure we'll get in because we talk about this quite a bit at the collective, is the access to capital pieces and what does that look like in our capital stacks and how challenging it is. I mean, that's a historic, a legacy. There's plenty well documented, known facts around disparities and how money moves into communities, particularly people of color. And thinking through that, the question I have as a follow-up to all of you is, as you start to like envisioning your projects, knowing what the impediments are, right? As you think about access to capital, about the fact that some of these neighborhoods have been neglected, and with the neglect, there's kind of environmental issues, environmental justice issues that go along that create some of the behaviors we see in people that are inhabitants of some of these places, the residents, right? What do you think about, like, how do you envision or start to envision like the opportunities in these neighborhoods as you develop them, as you add to like the housing stock, whether it's affordable, as Tayyib with the IF Lab, you start to think about what are those things that would bring density back, but also for a particular, like a creative class, right? Or a creative set of folks. Anthony, thinking about your work in West Powelton and parts of West Philly, like there's a lot of opportunity for us to bring like that energy you talk about, Anthony, into these, but we also have to have a vision, right? And so talk to us about, Tayyib, what's kind of your vision going into projects?
So not to get too theoretical, but when you talk about that, it makes me think about the history of entrepreneurship, right? And we think about entrepreneurship, most people today think of like a fast company, Silicon Valley, like tenets, exit, venture capital entrepreneurship, right? So like the average person doesn't understand that of the 2.3% of the businesses in a predominantly Black city that are Black owned, there's a minuscule number that reach $1 million in annual revenue, and there's also a finite number that reach even 5 employees, right? But when I think about the history of entrepreneurship, it's people who've had to use their own creativity and hustle, whether it's selling plates, doing house parties, doing block parties, to getting into brick and mortar businesses. And that is the genuine creative energy of small business and entrepreneurship, right? So you have to design things that are for people where they are, but then also give them a vision and a pathway to growing their business. And I've been fortunate that I had mentors and I had experiences, and I was given basically a path by my parents to tell me that most institutions didn't have my best interest. I had to approach things with a genuine entrepreneurship spirit to figure out how to crack or hack a code and to make change. So, to kind of bring it back, we are always in some plausible denial. The number of things that have been, as Anthony pointed out, with the federal government being in alliance with private banking to exclude us from being able to build wealth, we never deal with all of the different things that exclude us from being to be able to participate in the capital stack. We don't deal with only 3% of all the venture capital money to flow, thus to date, has gone to women and people of color. Only 7% of commercial real estate executives are Black people, people of color, or women. So you can't be included from a humanistic perspective if you're not in the table. Many people will hear me say, on a continuum, there are more MBA players than African-American architects, right? You cannot do a building, interior or exterior, without an architect. But we don't have the brilliance of someone like a Sandra Dungy Glenn or Lorraine or any of the women in 17 Asset Management participating from a space of equity in the design of our cities. And that, to me, is what holistic development is about. The average Philadelphian, by my estimation of reading data, is probably a 38, 35, 40-year-old woman of color, right? How many of them are in the capital stack? How many of them are designing, or reimagining how our city is designed?
So you bring up a really interesting point, because I'm going to go back to Lorraine's opening, right? So I often think of these things as opportunities, these discussions as opportunities to really hone in on the talent pipeline, like cultivating that talent, right? Because what you're bringing up is a really important issue around inclusion, right? But we have to have the right, be building those folks. And this is why, I'm doing the STEAMY workspace and some of these other things that we do in our communities to make sure that as these openings come up, one, we're already, and if they don't come up, we're creating our own lanes, which I think is what the collective is all about, is really creating our own lanes to get is the workaround to some of these things that Anthony and you bring up. So Lorraine, what's the strategy when you think about doing a development, right? And that there are gaps, if you will, for people who are like you, sitting at tables that you need to be at to things. What's some of the ideas you've had to fill those gaps or to cultivate talent to really address some of the challenges that Tayyib brings up?
So a couple of things. So I moved here. I'm primarily a business person. I did not have a background in real estate at all. But as a business person, you're trained to look and understand opportunity. So I think the first thing is just being able to look at a neighborhood and see opportunity. Because I think, like, not to, say anything bad against the majority population, but I think most would look at our neighborhood and say there's no value here. So first thing is being able to look at neighborhoods and just see, okay, well, where's the hope? Like, how do we create value here? And so for me, one of the advantages that we had is, land in these neighborhoods is pretty low priced. And yes, we have problems with appraisals and all of that. We have all those issues. But what I figured out is, as a business person, is if I could buy the land at a certain price, I could make a nice development happen. And so that's been true up until now. And I hope it holds. Things are changing post-COVID, but that's what I figured out is I knew where to look for the opportunity. And so the other thing that's happened is we've been able to create an ecosystem of Black and brown businesses. So my general contractor is Black, my plumber is Black, my electrician's Black, my HVAC guy is Black. And we've all been working together probably for the last 15 years or so. And so and we're all sort of building wealth together. The other thing is, I think I had to, and this really helped me because I don't have a traditional real estate lens, is I knew that if I could buy and hold something, that really is where I was going to make my money. So all of my properties cash flow, but that's not my driver. My driver is I get paid as the neighborhood comes up and as the values increase. And that is really the goal, to go into these neighborhoods that have really been devalued and help bring the value up. So from my perspective, it's just coming from a different lens and looking at it in a way that most people are not.
Yeah. Hey, Anthony, when you talk about, Lorraine brings up this notion of bringing the values up, and you all know that when you hear those things, you automatically think about like gentrification and some of those things, which are part of it, but not really it's not all of the context of it. So I'm thinking about your project on Osage and this idea of when you bring the values up from a monetary perspective, you also bring people's, Lorraine mentioned this, hope up. You bring their energy up. You bring the aesthetics of a neighborhood up. You bring the potential that they have for seeing themselves kind of beyond that actual block, or actually living within a neighborhood instead of the brain drain or fleeing the neighborhoods, right? So can you talk about how, like, maintaining, particularly from a construction perspective, or when you redo a building from a holistic perspective, what does that do to a community? Like what do people feel now when they go on Osage Avenue? And those of us who are born and raised in Philly, we know what that Osage Avenue meant, right? What does it do to see now, like viable homes or people with, planters or sitting on the porch or the stoop, or whatever you want to call it? What does that do to a community?
Well, I mean, Lorraine brings up a very excellent point. As she waits, she brings something to the community as we look to bring that to the Osage and Pine project. But we had our challenges with appraisals. We had our challenges with our property and land being fairly appraised, for a fair market value, so that the surrounding existing housing could also benefit from it, because then it increases their value and their equity into their home because of what's happening. But we still deal with a racist system of appraisers that are not checked. There's no monitoring mechanism there to check them. And they could come in here and they come up with all of these analysis of why they valued your property or your project or your land at this number, which affects everybody around it. So that's an ongoing problem. And this is why, it's something to hear Lorraine says that she has to wait until the value increases. And where in some neighborhoods that where a lot of white developers are developing, it's just mind-boggling of how their values of their properties and their developments are more valued than my development and the land that I purchased. But to get back to Osage and Pine, Leon, is that I just had the God-given spirit that if we did a good job, if we brought a good product to that community, because it was so many that we had to do 36 houses. And just knowing the history of the community, just looking around of how many other homes that was still stable and still kept, up, that if we did a good job, that it would help the community. It will, because when we came in, the values of the existing homes flatlined because it was so many abandoned housing in one cluster. Mm-hmm. And so nobody in the surrounding communities, when we did the comps, that their values of their homes had flatlined. But the minute that we started building and selling, their values increased almost about 100%. And now, and then as we began to work through and complete those houses, of course, we've seen the values and the demand, because the demand for that house that we were building began to increase. But it was good for the community. It was good for the neighbors. It was good for the surrounding communities. And then again, it brought other developers, those that was doing rehabs. We saw, to my surprise, within a year, and I know, one of the developers, Alan, who does a great job, his headquarters is like right around the corner, and where he began to do new construction as well. And now you go around Cobbs Creek area and 62nd and all that, you will see scattered sites of new development, new build there, which is good for the community, which is good for the surrounding residents. And that's what we want to see. But the problem isn't pretty much of the developers of the, strategy, because I had a strategy with Janie Blackwell at that time, who, this was a strategy of hers to bring that community back and then to increase the values, because she knew of what kind of community, Black affluent community it was before that happened. And she wanted it to see that healing and that could begin to, take root again, which it had, it has. Yeah. And, but it was key that we was able to do that and do a nice product, a high-end product that what we put there. And we was able to do that, and now it has impacted a lot of existing homeowners there that's been there for 30 plus years. But the issue, Leon, again, and I underline this as I stop on this subject, is it's the appraisers. The appraisers are a problem when it comes to dealing
Yeah.
with Black developers and also developers that have land that they want to build new construction. That's the problem.
Yes, interestingly, just a side note, but very related. I did a project with HUD, their Office of the Research, actually, right? Research and Evaluation, and HUD actually has a task force right now. Is in one of their subject places is Philadelphia, looking at the disparities in appraisals and land value. So it's interesting to be in this space now, and this is other conversation I'm having nationally with some of under the Biden administration in particular, around this equity conversation. Like everything is around, and some of these folks who've been in these government agencies have been waiting for years to have some of these conversations, and they now have an entry point. So,
Leon,
look for some of these things is if you can. Go ahead. Sorry, Lorraine.
My bank apologized to me for the last appraisal that I got.
Mm-hmm.
Oh wow. Okay. Yeah, that's new. So I mean, it's real, right? Like these things are real. And for our audience, I think it's you often hear the frustration of Black developers around the systemic and structural barriers that we confront, of which capital is only one. Like the whole notion of land values, of just public policy in general, and communities are subject to those things, which undermine their health and well-being and undermine their access to economic mobility, right? So I think when you hear our conversations, and these are kind of internal conversations that we have, and we want to make them public, it is not born from just a casual hate white man type conversation. These are essentially reactions to systemic barriers that we confront, and they're invisible to folks who are not in this space. Mm-hmm. I think that's the part where opportunities like this, is we get to kind of bring them to the forefront. But we also want to leave with some sense of like, what's the solutions? Like we're at the end of the day, we do this work because we're optimistic, right? Like nobody in this space, if we had these attitudes, or sense of this is all despair, we wouldn't really be doing this work. So I want, for like the last 30 seconds, each of you, just give me a 30-second, what are you optimistic about when it comes to being a Black developer in Philadelphia? Lorraine, 30 seconds.
Oh, damn. Let me go last because I need to think about that.
All right, Anthony, what are you optimistic about? Because you got a lot of good stuff going on. What are you optimistic about being a Black developer in Philadelphia?
I just, because there's a lot of opportunities in our neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. In Black and brown neighborhoods, there's a ton of opportunities. There's a ton of things that we can do to make our neighborhoods better. And we as Black developers know the vision. We know the pulse, and we have the passion to want to get it done. All
right, Tayyib, you got 10 seconds.
You said 30, so I'm going to take the whole 30. So respectfully, I think when we first gathered 2 years ago, I used to joke that we were Wu-Tang Financial. I feel like RZA in 1992. The amount of collaboration and dialogue and potential joint ventures that we've had just among ourselves, the questions and the answers that come out, and the deal flow that comes out from our annual internal meetings, that sorry audience, you're not fortunate enough to participate in. But I feel really optimistic that, we as a cohort have the opportunity to do something transformative. And when I talk to my colleagues in other cities, they say, you got 7 Black real estate developers who, are raising capital together and collaborating and, advocating for public policy changes. I think this is a national model that I'm proud to be a part of.
Good. So I know Austin is somewhere looking to pull the virtual hook on this session. So I want to thank you all for your partnership, for being great colleagues and friends, and the optimism we bring to doing the work that we're doing to change Philadelphia, redesign our neighborhoods, and to make it a prosperous space for all, not just for the few. So with that, Austin, I'm going to exit stage left. And thank you all, and thank the audience for kind of indulging us with your time for this session.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Great job.